Thank you very much, Professor Saiki, Dean Nakamura, Dean Osada, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to visit your fascinating country, which is for me a first-time visit, and a huge honor for me to speak at your university. I'd like to thank you, President, Professor Saiki, for this kind invitation. Since its founding in 1858, Keio University has always provided a window to the world. And for me as a Dutchman, it's an inspirational fact that your famous founder, Yukichi Fukuzawa, started this university as a school for Dutch studies. Fukuzawa was a man of the world who not only spoke his languages, but also visited many countries, including France, Germany, Portugal, and my country as well. So I couldn't think of a better and more welcoming place to deliver a speech about Europe than this center of open-mindedness. Fukuzawa lived and worked in a time of great challenge, like we do now. And as Professor Saiki underlines in his mission statement, the greater the change we're dealing with, the more important learning becomes. We are gathered here in the spirit of Yukichi Fukuzawa. We want to learn from each other, scrutinizing both strengths and weaknesses in order to become wiser and stronger. Now, if I had to name one thing I admire in this country, the first that comes to mind is resilience. I'm impressed by the way Nippon is recovering from the devastating earthquake, the subsequent tsunami, and the nuclear disaster that struck your country 4 years ago. It must still take a lot of energy, courage, and willpower to leave the past behind and face the future again. Some time ago, I read an interview with Haruki Murakami, who is possibly, as world-renowned authors tend to be, even more famous abroad than at home. And for us Europeans, Murakami has opened the door to modern life in Japan. And in the interview, he talks about the changes caused by the disasters. And I quote, "The reckoning that comes with losing so much and having to question what matters most." And that is an important question, in times of desperation, but also in times of change. So I recognize what he says when I look at the changes needed in Europe. In Europe, we are facing a new reality, which is forcing us to re-evaluate our institutions, our welfare state, our expectations. In short, we need to modernize our economies to achieve sustainable growth. For sustainable growth, the Eurozone needs to regain its competitiveness and its capacity to create jobs. That won't just benefit us, but also this part of the world, because Europe remains one of the most important consumer markets in the world. In sales terms, Europe consists of 500 million people. They have middle-class incomes and are looking for quality goods. EU member countries account for 19% of world imports and exports. This provides potential. Your part of the world and mine both have developed economies with great potential, but we also face similar challenges like an aging population and the need to innovate. So we can benefit from each other through trade and from each other's experience in facing the challenges of our day. To put it simply, we need each other. Let me give you some background information about the Euro area, also known as the Eurozone. It consists of those European Union countries, which have adopted the euro as their currency. The Eurozone currently has 19 member states. As of the 1st of January, Lithuania, our 19th member, joined the Eurozone. Sharing a single currency means that euro area countries must coordinate their economic and fiscal policies closely, much more so than other EU countries. Euro area finance ministers meet every month in the Euro group, and at these meetings we coordinate our policies, take necessary steps to promote financial stability in the euro area. We also discuss on a monthly basis all issues of common concern for the management of the single currency area. Today I would like to discuss with you where the Eurozone stands, and what is needed going forward, while taking account of the experiences of Japan. First, let me briefly touch on Japan's experience during its big banking crisis and our very recent experience. Both Japan at the end of the previous century and the euro area quite recently have experienced the impact of a bubble bursting. Both the Japanese and European economies highly dependent on banking system, and both experienced a substantial blow. Both are confronted with the drag on economic growth associated with the restoration of balance sheets, a necessary and lengthy process. While some aspects of our experiences are indeed similar, there are also important differences. I would argue that the most important differences lie in the underlying structural problems. In Europe, the crisis revealed a number of structural weaknesses in our economies and in the governance of our currency union. Our crisis response has focused on addressing these shortcomings. First, the crisis revealed weaknesses in European supervision of banks, and these have been vigorously addressed. The creation of a banking union has been a key achievement in restoring our banking sector to health. To start with, common European supervision has been established. The European Central Bank exercises direct or indirect supervision over all European euro area banks. And this enables us to apply the same standards to all banks and reflect the fact that many banks operate across European borders. We've also created a European resolution mechanism in case a bank gets in trouble. This provides clarity on what happens if a bank fails and prevents bank problems from infecting sovereigns and vice versa. This reduces risks for governments and taxpayers. Finally, only 2 months ago, the European Central Bank completed a comprehensive assessment of the 130 systemically relevant banks under its direct supervision. These large banks have undergone an asset quality review and a stress test, and over the coming months, banks will have to improve their balance sheets where necessary. This thorough exercise has fostered transparency about the condition that our banks are in, and it's generated confidence that the European banking sector is getting stronger. Second, euro area countries have been under pressure to get public finances back in order. And this differs from the Japanese experience. Since the mid-90s, Japanese fiscal policy has been highly supportive. As a result of more than 2 decades of substantial deficits, Japan's public debt ranks highest among developed economies. Low interest rates and the fact that the debt is mostly domestically held have enabled Japan to sustain this approach. Now, the situation in the euro area is very different. Financial stability has been at risk. With the costs of financing rising quickly, several euro area countries experienced huge pressure to put their public finances once again on a sustainable path. The crisis also revealed shortcomings in European rules and frameworks of the governing fiscal policy. So, from the moment the crisis started, the sustainability of public finances was tackled with great urgency. We have pursued a strategy of strengthened fiscal discipline and budgetary consolidation. We tightened our budgetary rules. We created a mechanism for monitoring possible macroeconomic imbalances, and we strengthened the European Commission's role in this surveillance process. For example, last December we discussed the draft budgets of all euro countries in the Eurogroup. It was not an easy discussion, but our candid and robust debate among each other reflects our common interest and commitment to the pact that we have. Finally, the crisis confronted many euro area countries with underlying structural weaknesses in their economies. First, support for countries under pressure from financial markets has been combined with vigorous reform. I want to underline the significance of the efforts made by what are known the program countries: Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Cyprus. They have pursued strong reform agendas and continue to do so. Their people have made painful sacrifices, and many countries have suffered major loss of income. But also other countries like the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, but also my country, the Netherlands, have worked hard to strengthen their economies by taking on structural reforms. Now, the countries that have implemented tough reforms have all achieved positive growth rates again in 2014. And this year, all these countries are expected to grow faster than the Eurozone average. To sum up, we didn't only tackle our short-term problems, we realized that our architecture and our rules were incomplete and needed improvement. And thanks to all the measures we've taken, the Eurozone is now much stronger than it was before the crisis. So where do we stand now? Growth is picking up, but it's weaker and slower than we would like. The peak in unemployment is over, but in many countries, too many people have been left without a job. Sorry, let me just get some water. The peak in unemployment is over, but in many countries, too many people have been left without a job. Inflation remains subdued, and in some euro area economies, prices have fallen. This is another area where Japan and the euro area are often compared. Commentators regularly wonder whether the euro area will experience a lost decade, like the years of low growth, rising debt, and falling prices in Japan. On this point, I would say first that Japan's experience should be put in perspective. Japan's mild deflation hardly played any role in Japan's debt dynamics. Public debt rose, but as a result of government spending, not deflation. So concerns over a negative debt deflation spiral may be unfounded. Secondly, while growth was moderate, this was mainly caused by Japan's shrinking population. In per capita terms, growth held up relatively well. The euro area differs from Japan when it comes to the causes of low inflation. Low food and energy prices play a large role. Prices are also affected by both demand and supply side dynamics. It's very difficult to distinguish between the two, but a number of euro area countries have implemented serious reform agendas, and higher productivity and relative price adjustments may cause prices to fall. At the same time, they make these economies stronger and more competitive. Spain is a strong example of this. In itself, the necessary and successful effort made by a number of euro area countries to gain lost ground is a positive development. At the same time, we're not done yet. The euro area needs a comprehensive growth strategy. We need strong and coherent policies in all relevant policy areas, sound monetary and fiscal policy, high-quality investments, and ambitious structural reforms. And we need to connect these different policy strands. Let me start with the support provided by the Ecb Monetary Policy. Like many other central banks, including the Bank of Japan, the ECB is confronted with the zero lower bound. And in response, and in the context of the weak euro area economy, it has resorted to unconventional measures. These days, monetary policy, and quantitative easing in particular, is a topic of lively debate. One point to make is that monetary measures will only be effective in combination with sound policy in other areas. It doesn't take politicians off the hook. We want the liquidity provided by the ECB to finance productive investments in the real economy instead of creating bubbles. This means that we have to take the right structural measures as well, restoring our banks to health as I mentioned earlier, has been a key element of this. And going forward, we need further measures to boost attractive investment opportunities. Also, beside monetary policy, we need sound fiscal policies. From the moment the crisis started, the sustainability of public finances was tackled with great urgency. We have pursued a strategy of stronger fiscal discipline and budgetary consolidation. And with an eye to our aging continent and keeping our social security system future-proof, healthy public finances remains a top priority. In this context, our set of common budgetary rules, the so-called Stability and Growth Pact, is key. The Pact is a rule-based framework for the coordination of national fiscal policies. It imposes fiscal discipline with limits on budget deficits and debt, and it functions as an anchor of confidence. Confidence among Euro countries and confidence for the financial markets. And all countries, large and small, should abide by these rules. The third element of our coherent policy mix is investments. Investment levels across Euro are too low and must be raised. In November, the new European Commission presented a 315 billion euro private and public investment program, the equivalent to about 45 trillion yen. This plan has three pillars. It mobilizes capital for investment through a European Fund for Strategic Investments. It brings together viable investment projects and private and public financing, and it contains measures to strengthen our investment climate. This includes better regulation, the development of capital markets, capital market union, and completion of the internal market in Europe. In particular, the digital agenda and energy grids offer opportunity for new investments. So we need to increase investment in Europe, and most of the increase has to come from private sources. To achieve this, we need to attract private investors. And companies' confidence in our growth potential will increase if we rigorously implement ambitious structural reforms at both the European and national level. This brings me to the final policy strand, structural reform. It's a key challenge. No stimulus can replace the need to make our economies more competitive, fit for the 21st century. Years of strong credit-fueled growth have masked some of our structural weaknesses, and a number of serious challenges lie ahead, such as aging and globalization. Japan is facing very similar challenges. Your government's three-arrow strategy reflects the fact that monetary, fiscal, and structural policies should go hand in hand. The government is committed to structural reforms, but is finding that this is not an easy task, and it is very much the same in Europe. To address weaknesses in our European economies, we need structural reforms, well-designed, well-timed. We need to improve our labor markets, lower the tax wedge on labor, further improve the skills of our workforce. We need to make our product markets more flexible, modernize our welfare system, and improve the quality of our research and innovation. That's why we need to focus on what we have already achieved and on the potential benefits that still lie ahead. In its Going for Growth report, the OECD presents the achievements of reform in Europe over the last 2 years. It shows that Greece, Italy, and Spain have reduced regulatory barriers to competition. Ireland and Slovakia have strengthened research and development and innovation incentives. Countries like France, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal have reduced their problems in the labor markets. And so I could continue. But we're not there yet. Take, for instance, the problem of protected sectors and professions. The European Commission has identified no fewer than 4,700 regulated professions in EU countries. Some of these make sense. such as medical specialists. You don't want everyone to say that he's a medical specialist. But others make much less sense, like golf instructors or even second-hand car salesmen. So this is an issue we really must address. Other issues include the age of retirement and dealing with the costs of healthcare in many European countries, an issue of concern. Implementing the right reforms can boost growth. The OECD has calculated that adopting best practices in labor and product markets could increase the Eurozone's output by more than 6 percentage points over 10 years' time. And in the Eurogroup, we like to say, let's use this potential. In Europe, but also in Japan, concerns about the fragile state of the economy are having a big impact on the discussion about structural reforms. For the euro area, a number of reforms measures will not only strengthen our potential growth, but may also increase demand in the short run. It's a myth that the impact of reform is only felt in the distant future. For example, measures to improve the tax system, reduce red tape, and allow regulatory barriers have an immediate impact. They can spur investments in both the short and the long term. Reducing the tax wedge would also bring benefits to many European countries. Many countries have been working on this reform, which impact both supply and demand side. And finally, increasing the pension age, extending the working week, can immediately improve public finances, even in the short term. My previous points underline the links between policies in the different areas. A growth strategy for the Eurozone requires us to connect all of these policy strands. An approach endorsed by the European Council, which will discuss ways of strengthening the European Economic and Monetary Union in the coming months. Together with Presidents Juncker, Draghi and Tusk, we will work on improving the coordination of our economic policies. We should put growth and job at the top of our priority list. We have to seize opportunities. We have to act promptly and rigorously, so our work should focus on the delivery of key reforms. To this end, we can do more to integrate reforms and budgetary efforts. This makes sense because the implementation of structural reforms can increase economic activity and potential growth and have a positive effect on public finances as well. It's also a way to incentivize reform efforts. So I advocate a more integrated assessment of compliance with budgetary rules. In making this assessment, we should distinguish between countries. Some countries fall under the preventive arm of our pact. Under these rules, these countries must stick to medium-term goals. Countries that implement key structural reforms could be given some more flexibility in reaching their budgetary targets. Reform measures should then be well specified, time-bound, and have a positive impact on public finances. The story is different for those countries who have a deficit higher than 3%. This is what's called the corrective arm. Under the corrective arm, the rules of the pact are more strict. While extension of the deadlines for corrective excessive deficits for those countries is already possible, this should require a reform effort as well. Countries that ask for an extension for their budgetary targets should step up their reform efforts in addition to meeting the current requirements. Ladies and gentlemen, making changes in the face of new circumstances is difficult for everyone, anywhere. And it's not easy to switch to a new approach, especially when you've known the success of the past. Yet it can be done by countries, by partnerships, and by companies. Let me give you one striking example. Fujifilm. This company has always illustrated Japan's innovative and resilient spirit. And over time, the company has proven its value more than ever. Because after the introduction of the digital camera, and perhaps more importantly, the camera on our phones, the market for camera film collapsed. Where a company like Kodak didn't transform and went belly up, Fujifilm reinvented itself. And nowadays, Fujifilm is a giant in life sciences, even working on a vaccine against the devastating disease of Ebola. Switching from making camera film to curing viral diseases, that's the kind of mentality, and it's a mentality that should make this country proud. Just like Fujifilm, the economies of both the Eurozone and Japan have to adapt to new circumstances. We both have to implement structural reforms. We both know what needs to be done. Implementation is hard. You can plan all you want, but the moment never seems right. And it's encouraging that monetary policy and fiscal policy can ease some of that pressure. But as soon as the pressure lets up, there is a risk of delay. And that should ring alarm bells. It's crucial to push ahead. We can do so by connecting sound monetary and fiscal policy, high-quality investments, and ambitious structural reform. And I will work relentlessly to achieve that goal. I think it's also smart to learn from others, and I trust Europe and Japan will continue to learn from each other and support each other to modernize our economies, to achieve sustainable growth, and prepare for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, in Europe, the oak is considered the strongest of all trees. Oaks are usually the last trees standing after a storm. But if the storm becomes a typhoon, even the mighty oak might fall. Japan and Europe have both withstood seemingly unstoppable storms. We did not fall. So perhaps we are not oaks. If necessary, we change our form, we move with the wind, we bend with it, leaning in a different direction, but we don't fall. We are not the oak, we are the bamboo. I strongly believe the best is yet to come for both parts of our world, and as Haruki Murakami has taught us, in times of change, we have to ask ourselves what really matters. You and I agree with your founder, Fukuzawa, that learning is one of those things. It matters a lot. But I would also like to mention another priority, the friendship between the countries of the Eurozone and Japan. May that friendship support us in our common effort to renew our economic growth. Thank you very much.
Would you like to stay there or sit down?
I'll sit down.
Okay. Thank you, President Dijsselbloem, for your lecture, which showed your deep understanding of the history of this university, as well as Japan's culture and economy, and how Europe and Japan share goals. You have also given us a concise account of the policies and institutional reform in Europe since the crisis. Now, as someone who compares Europe and Japan for a living, it was an especially encouraging speech, and I am very happy to be given the opportunity to make a small comment. I completely agree with the President that both Europe and Japan must ask Murakami's important question now, what matters most to us? We both must decide what to keep and what to give up in order to attain sustainability, fiscal, demographic, and environmental sustainability. The President also pointed out some differences between the crisis in Japan and the EU. I would myself like to point out one big difference, which is that Japan has no Europe. Some in the Eurozone expressed displeasure about the fiscal consolidation and other reform measures supported by your recent governance overhaul, but I would say, if only Japan were so lucky. We do not have the Eurogroup or the EU to provide the framework and encouragement, and yes, sometimes the pressure, to press forward with the necessary reforms. Such supranational frameworks are very important in many ways, but in the context of unpopular reforms, they are important to balance out the pressures of democracy, which can sometimes move the country in the wrong direction. I say this because this is what's happening in Japan. As someone who has lived through 2 lost decades in Japan, I have now come to the conclusion that short-term recovery measures are not going to solve Japan's problems, because our problem is one of sustainability, and unless the problem of sustainability is resolved, short-term recovery will also be constrained. The President talked about connecting the policy strands. Surely, the policy strands of the three arrows need to be connected in Japan too. But there is a limit to what monetary and fiscal policy can do for sustainability. It seems to me what is stopping Japan from achieving sustainability is the way in which Japan's democracy is functioning at the moment. In Japan, people over 60 vote twice as frequently as people in their 20s. And you have to be 20, not 18, to vote in Japan. On top of that, 1 in 4 Japanese is older than 65. And unfortunately, voters tend to vote for favors rather than policy, as revealed by recent election scandals. No wonder pension reform is slow, and nuclear power plants will be reopened in spite of polls showing high percentages of opposition. But young people are the ones who will pay for the debt that is 240% of GDP. And young people are the ones who will suffer the low pension payments and handle the nuclear waste. Japan needs to somehow find a way to reflect in policy voices of the young and of future generations. Otherwise, we will not be fiscally, demographically, and environmentally sustainable. And we do not have a supranational framework like the EU. We need to achieve all of this on our own. But turning our eyes back to Europe, maybe Europe is not different from Japan after all. Which brings me to my question to the President. What do you think is the role of democracy? What are the roles of political leaders and of voters in maintaining sustainability in the Eurozone? Because implementation of EU decisions can be made difficult, if not impossible, if voters do not accept them. And we are coming back to Murakami's choice. How much sovereignty are we asking these democratic countries to give up for sustainability? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your reaction, which I thought was very interesting, especially the emphasis that you put on the interest of the younger generation and how their interest, their long-term interest, is preserved in what we do today. And I think that is the responsibility of all politicians in any country, not just to take into account today's interests of today's generations, but also future generations. And I think that brings me to how to do this in a democratic way. Forced by the crisis and by the lack of confidence in financial markets, etc., countries have had to take drastic measures, which under normal circumstances would not have been supported democratically. And yet in period of crisis, you sometimes have to take steps immediately to put right your budgets, to regain confidence, to take some measures which revitalize your economy. I think that European voters have been very patient, very patient. And it's been difficult, of course, to explain some of these tough measures that were necessary. But European voters, like Japanese voters, will also at one point ask for results. They need to see the end of this difficult time. They need to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, in a lot of countries, that light is beginning to appear. Economic growth is returning, low still, weak, but it's returning. Unemployment is starting to go down, but the offers asked of our electorate have been great. Now, I don't believe in politicians who will tell you, vote for me and I will turn back the clock and make everything the way it was before the crisis. And I would like to say to the electorate, certainly in our countries, in Europe, please don't believe those politicians. It's impossible. We had in a number of countries a standard of living which was not sustainable. a welfare state widened and larger than we could afford. So we have to do two things. We have to become more competitive, and that sometimes asks difficult, unpopular measures, and at the same time maintain the social system that we have, but in a more sustainable, future-friendly way. We have to address the issue of the pension system. We have to address the issue of the costs of healthcare. Europe is an aging continent, etc. We have to open up our markets, create business opportunities. We have to cut red tape, etc. I think that what Europe needs is politicians that are a little more brave, that confront also and not just promise. Some politicians always make the mistake think that they have to promise people things. But you also sometimes have to confront the electorate in saying, look, this is where we are, this is our situation. I think it's possible to go there, to have that economic recovery, to return to growth, and at the same time maintain and modernize our social welfare system. But to get there, we'd have to take some steps. And that's the honest story. So my answer is, let's not be worried about democracy. Let's not be worried about elections in whatever country. Let's continue this reform path to modernize Europe and become more competitive. And I would certainly hope, and this is a message I'm giving to European politicians, maybe it's also for Japanese politicians interesting, be fair and be honest about the difficult steps that you have to take. There is a perspective, but it takes sometimes difficult decisions. And I think we have to take our voters serious. And I do. So that will be my answer.